It's not every day that someone claiming to be your mother comes over to tell you that she killed a bunch of people to protect you. A woman who goes to those lengths has to be a little insane, right? Well, whether she is or whether she's not, you should still be cordial and offer her a beverage when she comes for a visit. Before you decide to clobber her over the head, you could say, how about some water or some orange juice or even a nice cold mug of beer? But, and regular listeners will certainly know where I'm going with this, it could also be a hot cup of coffee. And guess what? We have a sponsor who sells that very thing. They are Sparkplug Coffee, the online service that offers the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada. They have half-calf and decaf options too. They've even got rotating seasonal blends amongst their plethora of roasts and blends. Being an American or a Canadian is key here because Sparkplug isn't yet packaging up things to send to Belgium or Bhutan or Burkina Faso. But we Canadians will get our orders within a week and the shipping will be free. Americans will get their stuff within a week too, although they won't get free shipping. And do yourself a favor, become a member of the Autopilot Coffee Club. That will get you perks and deals that some casual buyer won't get to enjoy. And members save dollars on every order. If you need to, you can customize to get your orders when it suits your drinking schedule. Perhaps you're being driven crazy by two vindictive women and just can't even. In that case, pause or even cancel. That flexibility tells you straight out that this is not a Coffee of the Month club. What you must do now is go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. A one-time 20% savings will be yours if you use that HYES promo code. We're about 20 seconds away from beginning our review, so get comfy. Bev, you know what to say now.
And action!
Have you ever seen... Psycho 2. Happy day before Halloween, movie fans, and welcome to the 545th edition of Have You Ever Seen? Oh, before we go on, I should thank Andrew Luther one more time for adapting our score this month. This is the 7th episode and the final one of October. He did the scary version of our theme song. So after this review is done, our 8th annual Scary Movie Month will also be done, although we've given you 7 podcasts in the past 30 days. Might not be a record, but it's got to be close. And each of the previous October episodes have had full spoilers, and so will this one. I'm the off-his-rocker brunette who likes a nice clean shovel in the kitchen and is becoming confused again, Ryan Ellis. And here's my podcast partner, the sandwich lover who isn't nearly vindictive enough to torture a mentally frail man, my wife Bev.
That's me.
I mentioned sandwiches. Notice how Norman eats like a kid. Not that adults can't eat sandwiches and cookies and drink milk. I certainly do. But it's, I think, a deliberate choice to infantilize him.
To eat a sandwich for supper?
Every time he talks about eating, it's always a sandwich.
Yeah, but he has been institutionalized. He never learned to cook, I guess.
Well, he's also infantilized in the first movie. He's eating things like... And again, you can eat candy, but he's eating some kind of candy thing in the first movie. I forget what it is in one of the scenes. That feels like something a kid would do.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We know he never had a chance to really grow up, and this is the proof. Well, part of the proof. All right, the coming attractions trivia question for Psycho 2. A famous director who's still actively making movies is a big fan of the sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's classic. So much so that that person thinks it's better than Hitchcock's flick, The Flitchcock. Who is that famous director?
I'm going to take a wild stab at this and say Tarantino.
Oh, nice wild stab.
Really?
Quentin Tarantino. Of all the movies and filmmakers I've heard QT talk about over the years, I don't recall him saying that much about Hitchcock, for the good or for the bad. So I don't really know how he stands, but there he was in his podcast. I think earlier this year, I listened to, not that many of them, because they cover so many movies. He and Roger Avery, who co-wrote Pulp Fiction. So many movies that I don't know that well, and I feel like I'd be lost. I'm sure we have the same problem with our podcast. People don't know about Ugetsu or something like that, or Gene Dioman, and say, well, I'm not going to listen to that one. I'll come back when you do something I know. It's just understandable. I've done that with their podcast, for example. But I know I heard him talk about how Psycho 2 he thinks is even better than the original. I
think I picked him because he has such a soft spot for B films.
Yes.
So he felt like the obvious choice.
Although this is quite a well-made sequel. And
it's not a B film.
It's pretty worthy of the first movie.
But it has like some kind of exploitative elements, I guess. So it's
the first one.
More of a gory slasher. Yeah, you're right. The first one does have some gory slasher exploitative. The shower scene alone was next level. It was the first film to ever have a flushing toilet.
Yep. First Hollywood, anyway.
Yeah, right.
Hitchcock's point also was there were all these terrible movies that were coming out for probably decades, really, but especially in the 50s. And he thought, well, let me try something like this. What if this is made by someone with talent and not a big budget, but bigger than Roger Corman or someone like that would have had?
Obviously, these films struck a nerve. Obviously, there's a market of people who want to see this, quote, trashy stuff. So, right, yeah, what happens when a good director gets their hands on it?
Okay, Richard Franklin's Psycho 2 was released by Universal Pictures 40 years ago on June 3rd, 1983. They didn't sink a whole lot of buck jobs into the budget, but it wound up making close to 7 times the production costs. But Bev, a 40-year-old movie that most people probably don't revere quite as much as Tarantino does, needs a refresher. So if you would, give us the long skinny on Psycho 2.
Anthony Perkins is Norman Bates 22 years after the events of Psycho. Released from custody, Norman moves back into his old house, gets a job at a diner, and befriends Mary, a down-on-her-luck waitress who comes to stay with him. Mysterious things begin happening to Norman that make him start questioning his sanity and whether or not he's truly rid himself of his mother's ghost. When people start dying, Mary confesses that she and her mother were the ones behind the strange happenings. But it's too late. There's a new slayer at the Bates Motel, and Norman's weak hold on reality has been fractured.
Just to be a pedant, I think they say in the movie it's been 22 years, but this movie came out 23 years after the original. But they probably made this, let me see, July to August of 82. Man, they held off releasing this for almost a year then. What's that, about 10 months later? Or, in a nutshell, mother-loving motherfucker head fucks his other mother. Guess we got an R on this one right there. Mother-loving motherfucker head fucks his other mother. Okay, the Rotten Tomatoes numbers on Psycho 2. Only 62% of those critics on Rotten Tomatoes like this movie. 5.6 out of 10 is the average. So there you go. The average is not even a fresh tomato, but the percentage is just barely. And 61% of audiences. There are 37 reviews by the critics on the site, by the way. The first movie, the original movie, in 1960, has 97% of critics on Rotten Tomatoes liking it. Psycho 3 was, I think, at 60 or 61 not long ago, but I looked last night, and now it's at 59, so not quite a fresh tomato. And I've seen Psycho 3. I've got it on hold from the library, the DVD. We'll get it at some point. I remember liking it, and Perkins directed that too. The Psycho remake, which you apparently saw before the original, right? You told us that.
I sure did.
Yeah.
I think I had a crush on Vince Vaughn at the time. It was a period in history, you know?
Bad casting for him to play Norman Bates.
Oh,
maybe nobody could, but
atrocious.
he wasn't good casting for that. Especially that giggle. He would giggle like that to make sense.
No, he was terrible.
He's also so huge. Perkins isn't small, but he is slight. And Vaughn looks like he could beat everybody up.
Yeah, he did not pull it off.
So anyway, that one is at only 41%, which is higher than I thought it would be, actually. And Bates Motel, the series, which I watched for a while but gave up on, and I don't even know where you can find it anymore. Maybe it was Netflix back then, is at 93%, so better than all except the original movie. I remember it being pretty good. I just didn't stick with it. The sequel here was 20th at the 1983 U.S. box office. Return of the Jedi was number 1. The Best Picture winner, Terms of Endearment, was number 2. And The Dead Zone was number 37. We've covered all 3 of those films. The original Psycho is 165th on Box Office Mojo's Top 200, adjusted for inflation. So we know it was a big hit. That really tells you there. But then this was a hit too. You had never seen it before. I've seen it probably at least 3 times. I certainly couldn't give away the ending because it's one of the great twists, that what the fuck type ending. So what do you think about that? And what do you think about the movie itself?
I was caught up in the story from the jump. It had some legitimately great thrills and tense moments, and this mystery that truly kept me guessing right up to the end. And that moment that you're referring to in the final act that almost elevates it to the level of the Hitchcock original.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite put it at that level either, but this is very entertaining.
Very,
and
yeah.
consider the first
film.
movie, both movies are about terrible things, but it's an entertainingly made movie. Richard Franklin knew what he was doing. He'd made, I think he's Australian. Road Games is one of them, I believe. Jamie Lee Curtis was in that, and Patrick also before this. Then he did Cloak and Dagger with the writer Tom Holland. So Franklin was a pretty good choice, but people probably don't remember the guy's name other than obviously Tarantino making this movie and following one of the most, probably the most famous director in the history of films. I guess Spielberg maybe, but Hitchcock is at least number 2 then when you talk about famous names. And the way he looks as well. Everyone knows what that guy looks like. And there's that moment in this movie, too, where Mary and Norman are about to go into Mother's room, and before the lights get turned on, you can see a, silhouette. Although Hitchcock was dead, so that was just some kind of thing they did.
It was a little homage, his silhouette among the shadows.
His cameo.
Did not notice.
Yeah,
exactly.
He'd been dead for a few years.
I didn't notice. You pointed it out to me, and I thought it was really cool. I really loved it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the movie, too. As for the twist at the end, because I hadn't seen the whole movie in a long time, I forgot that it really is, for the most part, earned. Because, yes, you have a great shock moment, him just blasting this woman in the back of the head. What a great stunt that was, too, because He picks up the shovel. Of course, it's a prop shovel. This actress must have something in the back of her head.
Well, she's wearing clearly a wig. So she probably has some kind of padding on the back of her head that the wig is hiding. And then you have a prop shovel that's made of who knows what. It's just like a light plastic that isn't actually going to hurt her no matter how hard.
It looks like he really wails on her, though.
Well, I think audio goes a long way towards selling these kinds of moments. And then her performance, like you say, great stunt. She falls backwards, the chair breaks. She does this little convulsion that takes it to the next level. The moment is so surprising because, first of all, you're led to believe, oh, he might poison her. He reaches for the tea tin that we know contains poison from the first film. Is that right? Is it a reference to the original Psycho?
I forget if it's... Well, it can't be that he poisoned her in the first movie until the very end during the long explainer scene by that doctor, because that's one of the great things about Psycho. If you didn't know the twist, I assume people must know Psycho if they listen to this podcast, and we already said we're going to spoil movies. We got to spoil the first one. But most of the first movie, we think he's covering up for the mother. We think she's the one who's killed the detective, and of course Marion early on, and we learn later on other women too, until we find out later that Norman was dressing up as his mother and acting like her, talking like her. So I don't think we would have found out he poisoned her. Maybe the doctor does say that in the very end, but not through the story. Until that point, we didn't know that he killed her. We also think she's alive. Why would we think she's dead in any way, whether it be natural causes or poison? And that's, of course, in this storyline, retconned. And I think it's retconned in one of the other ones as well. Maybe the fourth one, the TV movie, Psycho 4, A New Beginning, I think it's called, or just Psycho 4 Beginning. Anyway, they show him as a young man, as does Bates Motel, the show. But the retcon is that she was only his aunt.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Bates raised him, and what's her name again? Mrs. Poole says, I'm your actual mother. But because he's now hearing mother, beyond what Mary and Lila are doing, especially Lila calling and saying, it's your mother, we never find out what she's specifically saying because we don't actually hear her do this, but we know she's admitted she is doing it, probably saying, you got to kill again, you got to kill this girl, meaning Mary. That's a big gambit. What if he actually did it? He never does try to, but what if he did? Then you're getting your own daughter killed. But this is a vengeance movie. We could have covered it months ago during Revenge Month, because this is definitely revenge from Lila.
It's Spool. It's not Poole. Her name is Poole. Emma Spool.
Oh, yes.
One of the big flaws of this film is that it's too plotty. The plot just gets in its own way, and I don't think it pulls off its twist with the elegance that you think it has, because there's this whole setup that somebody's pretending to be his mother. We know that it's Lila. We know that Mary's in on it. Lila, of course, being the sister from the first film, so she reprises her role. She's out for revenge. Quite a character turn from the first film to the second film, but fine, 22 years have passed. We're just going to let it go. I guess so. I mean, she's a hero in the first film, and she's a real villain in this film. Bit of a stretch.
She's been driven insane. She's
been driven insane by the criminal justice system, not looking after this man who should not have ever been let out of...
And she married Sam Loomis, who was Marion's boyfriend, but I think he was married is what it was. So at some point he did divorce that wife. Oh. Marion's dead, and then he marries Lila instead.
She has made some choices in her life. So she is pretending to be the mother, but we don't know that she is the impetus behind telling him to kill Mary. And I say that because the film pretty clearly illustrates that he is hearing his mother's voice again, that he actually is driven mad. He very dramatically always switches the phone from his right ear to his left ear.
He does that, that's right.
The switch is being flipped there, and that he's hearing the voice in his head.
At least one time we know for sure there's nobody on that phone when Mary goes up to the extension.
Exactly, because you could argue maybe it is Emma Spool, his actual birth mother. Maybe she's also calling him and putting voices in his head. But no, we know for sure, the movie confirms that he is hearing the voices in his head. He has gone crazy again, thanks to Lila, thanks to Mary, who regrets and recants her behavior. But the damage is done. This man was so fragile, he never should have been let loose in the world in the first place. So when the twist comes at the end, Emma Spool shows up and says, actually, I am your mother. Because there was some suggestions here and there that his mother wasn't his mother.
Yeah, he's saying that long before the end of the movie. With confidence, he says to the doctor, by the way, another Tarantino thing, I think it's the same podcast I heard him say, he likes this movie better than the original Psycho. He always calls Robert Loggia. I've never heard anyone else ever call him Loggia before. Maybe he's right, but he does an okay job as the doctor. He does say you won't have a social worker because they're cutbacks. And he can't
go to halfway home because...
And he goes to that hotel and the diner and the house quite a lot, and then gets accidentally killed by Mary, completely accidentally later on.
I mean, completely accidentally, but let's face it.
She's wielding
You're going to go to a murderer's house and hide in one of the rooms and be like, boo! Yeah. You're taking some pretty wild risks.
And he knows that the Loomises are doing this by that point. That's the whole point. He called Norman. Right. He calls Norman from the hotel in town where Lila was staying. Mary's been staying with Norman for all this time. But Lila was staying there. He calls from there and says, I found this out. I don't want to do his voice. He's too hard. All right. He calls her. We see this scene happening. But Norman, and I think Mary's in the room with him, is saying, yes, Mother. Sounds good, Mother. But it's not Mother for sure. It's not Lila. It's not Mrs. Spool. It's not him imagining something. It's his doctor calling him, and he's not hearing that.
Yeah, right. Now, when he starts saying to his doctor, maybe my mother wasn't my real mother, and my real mother is still out there, I really thought that was just a man's mind trying to put pieces together, understanding that his mother is dead, but still needing an explanation for why he's hearing his mother's voice in his head, because it's schizophrenia or whatever's actually wrong with him. And so he invents the story that there is another mother.
Would you prefer that?
The last act of the movie happens and Emma Spool comes and confesses, actually, I am your real mother. I gave you up to my sister who you thought was your mother your whole life. And I also spent some time in an institution and I also did some bad things, but I'm here now. And then he immediately kills her and does the same thing that he did with his other mother. Takes her body and takes it upstairs, puts it in the chair. After all that happened, I think I said to you, well, none of that was real, right? That's all clearly in his head. Emma Spool is an invention. In his psyche, she didn't exist. And you're like, no, she exists. That's real. That's a real person that shows up. That's his real mother.
Oh, I could be wrong. She's at the diner.
I know. I think you're right. I think that's what the movie is implying. I was just so convinced that this was all in his head. The thing that convinced me that she had to be real is the murders. Because, okay, you have the motel manager, Dennis Franz, playing his greasiest self.
He does this so well.
Laying it on so thick. He gets murdered, and you could believe that it was Norman. There's no, real reason.
Or even Lila.
That it couldn't have been. Or that it was Lila, although I don't know why Lila would bother killing him.
Because it looks like Norman killed him, that's why.
Right. At any rate, there's lots of deniability there of who could have killed him. And he was a vile person. Would Lila kill him? Maybe. I mean, nobody's going to miss some kind of thing. But when the teenagers break into the basement and somebody murders the boy,
everyone's
and the girl
accounted
gets
for
away,
except for Norman and Mrs. Spool.
No, Norman is accounted for because he's locked in the attic, and we know that.
But then the attic is unlocked later on. He says he fell asleep.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But he's
that's
like
right.
Norton in Fight Club. He falls asleep, and then bad things happen.
Right, because I thought a more elegant ending would have been that he was committing murders.
Maybe you're right. But the Loomises definitely didn't kill those kids because they were accounted for.
If the Loomises killed those kids, come on. They have a motive. They're not bad people. They're troubled people.
You broke and entered this guy's house. I'm going to kill you. And you smoke pot.
Exactly. Like, who's going to kill? Oh, a teenager that smokes pot and have sex. Okay, well, that's like most teenagers in the world. So you're going to go on a real murder spree if you have a problem
Mrs. Spool turned
with
into a modern slasher from it. There, Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers. Recreational drugs and at least the suggestion of casual premarital sex, you're dead.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a murder of a true innocent. They broke into a house that they thought was empty to
and
fool
kids
around.
did that for, sounds like decades.
I don't think I ever broke into an empty house, but I'm sure that I trespassed when I was a teenager so I could do drugs and fool around with my boyfriend. So the one true innocent that dies in this film is that poor kid.
Well, Toomey's terrible, but Toomey shouldn't be killed, though.
Okay, fine, but he's not an innocent. In slasher film standards, Toomey deserves to die. He's a foil for, or hero of the film, which is Norman. A little twist on that.
Interesting as well, because the original film, and it's one of those that when I saw it, I knew what the twist was long before. Just like when I first saw Empire Strikes Back, I knew that twist. And Citizen Kane, I knew that twist. I wish I didn't with all of these, by the way. But in Psycho, you're watching the entire movie, unless you are really smart, smarter than I ever was. Well, a lot of people are. But when you first see that, you didn't read the novel, because apparently Hitchcock bought as many of Robert Bloch's novels as he could so that people wouldn't read it and find out the twist in that, too. And apparently that novel's pretty bad, and Norman's nothing like the Norman that's in the movies. But anyway, that whole story, Psycho, would refer to this mother that's killing these girls and this detective that comes into her house until we find out it's not. She was never alive through this entire storyline, and then he also killed her. But now we've got an almost 2-hour movie where we know the whole time what Norman did and then him going down that same path, which would make perfect sense if he did. So you're right. I like the fact that Mrs. Spool is in this. It's fine. And it's not like she comes completely out of nowhere, because when I've seen the clip on YouTube, just the ending many times, even though I think it's really well done technically, and I think it is an awesome, shocking moment, I also thought it wasn't earned. I do think it's more earned now because she's at the diner. My nutshell was going to be Statler needs to find an entirely new staff. Mary was working there, Spool was working there, and Norman had already quit. But all three of these people worked for this Statler guy in this little roadhouse.
It's a bit of a coincidence. They needed all these people at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, how convenient for all these people that need to
It's
get
one
near
thing for
Norman.
both Mary and Mrs. Spool to want to be there for Norman's sake, one to protect, one to torment. But they had to be hired by the guy.
Yeah.
And luckily enough, there were openings. Norman didn't last that long. But anyway, yes, this entire story being one where we know what Norman did in the past and what he's capable of doing now. I think maybe in some ways I like his performance. Maybe not better than the very first movie, but it's close to as good considering we don't have that incredible twist.
So I disagree. I don't think he's great in this movie.
Okay.
He's kind of wooden and opaque, and he's not a particularly naturalistic actor. And I think in the first Psycho, because he's not as prominently featured as he is in this, he's truly the main character of this film. Whereas in the original, we don't see that much of him. Everything we see of him
sure we
is
do.
menacing.
It just takes a while
and
to get to him.
kind of otherworldly. Okay, but he doesn't have to carry the film, and you don't have to have empathy for him, even though you kind of do, actually. I don't think his performance is that good in this film. It's fine. Like a solid B.
There are a
B
few
minus.
moments it's not great. I think overall I do like it. I think because he's got to play something that's way more literal.
Maybe it's the type of performance that worked in 1960, but by 1983, styles have changed. Acting styles have changed dramatically, and he's still like a bit of an old-fashioned actor that's playing to the cheap seats.
Okay.
I find it a little bit overkill, a little bit corny, and he doesn't have this naturalistic way. I'm not saying that Meg Tilly is the greatest actress of her generation, far from it, but she just comes across as more real in this film.
She's
than
good
he
in
does.
this.
She is good. She's not great, but she's very good. And it helps, of course, that she's really beautiful. There's something just so appealing about her. And there's something about her nature that is very winning. Of course, her character has to convince an audience that any person in their right mind would make any of the choices she makes in this film. Almost more so once you learn that she's acting on behalf of her mother, that her mother has convinced her to put herself in harm's way like this.
That's true.
At the very least, she should be exhibiting tons of wariness that she doesn't. But of course, if she exhibited wariness, then it would give all these hints to the audience that there's something afoot here.
Before they literally show it.
The clunkiness of the plot, because it is too plotty, and they're too precious about these twists that aren't worth it in the end, makes her character make less sense.
She's also trying to get revenge, obviously more for her mother, but it would be for her aunt. But an aunt she never met.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Because her aunt's lover is her father, and that happened, obviously, meaning Lila and Sam getting together. Maybe it was only weeks or months later. Maybe they moved quickly after Marion's funeral. But in any case, she wouldn't have been born until probably years after Marion was knifed to death in a shower in California.
Yeah.
I was reading as well online, people that know a lot about the law, I guess. They said he couldn't have pled insanity way back in the 60s because he knew right from wrong. And the evidence of that is that he was covering up what was really going on. Now, I said earlier he's like Edward Norton where he has blackouts. Edward Norton in that movie would definitely go to jail for the things he's done if he was ever caught by the real cops, not by the ones who were part of his fight club. He should. He's the one that did these things. It wasn't Brad Pitt. But the thing he couldn't prove that we know is true as viewers of the movie is that he really wasn't doing them in his right mind sense.
But he was still doing them. That's in his mind. Tyler Durden lives in his mind, so he is still guilty in a sense.
No, he's guilty. I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah.
he is. Then again, I'm about to backtrack. I was going to say Norman knew what was going on, but it sounds like, and they couldn't tell us this in the first Psycho until that explainer at the end by the psychiatrist, because we don't know what's going on until the last few minutes, that great ending, when he comes down the stairs, the scene that used to give me the willies. Doesn't anymore, I've seen it so many times, but I'm Norma Bates! When Lila, young Vera Miles, is down the basement with the corpse of Norma Bates. I was going to say that Norman is aware of what the mother side of him is doing. But then again, no, he's not. I don't think it's supposed to be that way. When he goes into killing mode, he's her. His own version of her, because I don't think she was supposed to ever... Maybe in Bates Motel, the show, I don't know. I didn't watch enough of it.
But it's kind of irrelevant.
But not in the sense of, I'm going to kill this
yeah.
fucking bitch in the shower. It's more his mind's version of her, and she's been dead for quite a long time.
But he's not being possessed. He is unhinged. He has either dissociative personality disorder or some kind of schizophrenia.
But he was covering up murders, and that's why he wouldn't have been able to plead insanity and then get let out 22 years later.
But even so, even if a shrink could say he's not in his right mind, he has no idea what's going on. And I agree with you. I listened to enough murder podcasts to completely second that he knew right from wrong. He may belong in a mental institution, but no court of law is going to say that he was guilty by insanity. And that the right regimen of drugs and treatment could make him fit to be released into the public again.
The thing they can't control is the thing that maybe somebody should have controlled, is don't go back to that goddamn house. Or that hotel.
Yeah.
Motel.
He makes all the wrong choices. We talk about Dr. Raymond. I'm not saying Dr. Raymond deserved to be killed in that situation exactly, but come on. First of all, you vouch for the release of a murderer who's obviously not ready. And then you give him inadequate resources and hides in the house and sneaks up on someone dressed like Norman's mother. I mean, the man is asking to get killed. There's like a little bit suicidal right there. But most of all, letting this man out of prison is clearly the wrong decision. Lila's right about that when she's in court fighting to keep him away.
She says that the courts protect the criminals, which is, of course, Dirty Harry's standpoint in the first, I guess all of them, but we covered it a couple years ago, the first Dirty Harry, which is a very right-wing point of view, usually to take. Well, most reasonable people that know anything about the law will say you have to let 10 guilty men go free rather than have one innocent man be put in jail or executed or something.
I think even if he had gone to a halfway house and had a social worker and had every possible resource available, eventually things would have gotten stressful enough in his life that he would crack again.
Do you think even if the Loomises did none of this that he would have?
He's so fragile. It takes like a week.
I don't know if he would have. I think if they left him alone, and maybe he deserved at least some of this torture. I don't know. Depends on your point of view of someone who's mentally ill. A lot of people would hear that and think, what are you talking about? He's mentally ill. He can't control himself. Others would say, yeah, but he's still a killer. And like we say, at the very least, whatever went on in his mind with Marion and the women before her, and then also killing Arbogast, the investigator, whatever happened to his brain, he covered up those murders.
He's a killer. You can be mentally ill and evil at the same time. You know what I mean? Not implying people with mental illness are evil. Not at all.
Also, would he have heard his mother's voice in his own head when he killed her, Norma Bates, and her lover?
Good question.
She was still alive, not much longer, and that lover as well. Is that what's going on? Norman, you can't do these. Stop touching yourself. Whatever her things that she was saying to him when she was alive. I'm going to have to go watch Bates Motel again and find out if Vera Farmiga could pull off Mrs. Bates. Apparently, what's her name again? Virginia Gregg, the voice of Mother Bates, also did the voiceover in Psycho. So 23 years later, she comes back and does it again. And in Psycho 3. Psycho 4, I don't think she did that one. I think she wasn't involved anymore. But that's the same voice you hear in the first movie that you hear in this one. John Gavin, by the way, did not come back. And they didn't need him anyway to play Sam. You just kill him off. That's easy enough to do. But the reason why he didn't, for sure, is because he was busy being the U.S. ambassador to Mexico from 81 to 86 under Reagan.
Reagan was an actor, his fellow actor.
Yeah.
Wasn't he the president of SAG?
He was.
For a while, yeah.
I think there's only 2 on-screen killings in the first Psycho. One's the most famous, or one of the most famous scenes anyone's ever shot, and it's not as graphic as everyone thinks it is, because you never see the knife go into the body, or if you do, it's the quickest of flash frames. Brilliant editing, brilliant storyboarding, preparation by Hitchcock, Saul Bass, the actors playing it, although it was never Anthony Perkins doing any of it. And they reprised that in the beginning of this, by the way, with the Psycho music. Jerry Goldsmith was given the chance to use the music in this, and I guess he just turned down the studio, but I guess Universal would have wanted it because it's one of the most famous scores ever.
I think I said this when we were watching the film.
You like the score, though, right?
I really like the score, and I never like scores.
You've also said that of all the Hitchcock movies, Psycho is your favorite.
Psycho's my favorite.
And I'm assuming you love the music.
Yeah. Of course.
Bernard Herrmann was
classic for a reason.
Great, yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of scores that I like fine when I hear them outside of the movie, but I feel like a lot of films have too much score. But no, I really love the score in this film.
So anyway, the killings. We definitely have 2 in the first movie and implied a lot more before the story even started. In this one, you've got, let's see, Lila is stabbed in the face by, it turns out to be Mrs. Spool. Apparently they shot a scene where Mary survived the gunshots but then went insane. But in the story we're watching here, the cops shoot and kill Mary when she's got the knife over Norman's head. She wasn't about to kill him, I don't think, right? Well, she was defending herself because he was coming at her, because he was going into mother mode, so he would have killed her in that basement, or she would have killed him in self-defense. But they kill her, so she's dead by a gunshot. He kills Mrs. Spool at the very end. Toomey gets killed by Spool. The kids get killed by Spool.
Just the kid. One kid.
Oh, right. The other one gets away. That's right. The girl gets away. That's one of the biggest bloody moments.
And the doctor gets killed by Mary.
Oh, right. Of course. Yeah. Accidentally. But that's one of the few non-mysteries. We see what happened. It wasn't deliberate. They're both on camera. There's no mystery as to who did it.
3 different murderers. One unintentional, but the other 2 intentional.
Yeah, right. Most of them are by Spool. So the movie's got a lot more blood than the original one did. And of course it was black and white. This is in color. But the scene I always found a little weird, it felt like it had to be not real, but Mary sees it too, is when blood comes out of the toilet and out of the tub, implying it's from the kid. How did that happen?
Because there's a bloody shirt flushed down the toilet.
But why did the tub have water coming out of it?
The tub doesn't... I think that's just Hollywood. Like, I think that's just a fun touch. Why anybody in the right mind, sleeping awake, crazy, possessed by devils, would flush a t-shirt down the toilet and expect that to be a good way to dispose of a bloody t-shirt. Pretty dumb, but I guess he's very much not in his right mind. Or I guess... No, it must have been Emma. So she comes upstairs and flushes the t-shirt down the toilet.
When she killed the kid in the basement. It wasn't like she killed him right in that room.
Clearly, they made the film too plotty so they could get these cool moments. They had these cool moments in mind and they wrote backwards from there.
Yeah. They did make you scream once, though.
Oh.
One of the eyeball scenes, which would be Mrs. Spool watching from one of the other rooms.
Oh, yeah, that was scary.
Because Mary sees the eyeball.
The tension was beautiful.
She thinks it's Lila, and then she calls her and finds out it's not Lila. Lila's in the...
Yeah, at this point, you think Mary would be more scared for her freaking life. She must think it's Norman, a murderer.
Well, first she thinks it's her mother until she calls her and finds out it's not. And she can trust her mother, you would think, except her mother is going over the edge. But okay, fine, she trusts her. But your whole game is to make this guy kill again so he'll get put back in jail where they think he belongs. But then shouldn't you be more concerned he might kill you, Mary?
The most obvious target. Once he starts talking to himself, she hears him on the phone talking about how his mother wants him to kill her.
And what he did more than anything else in the original storyline was to kill young girls that excited him. That's what the doctor says in the ending of Psycho.
Right.
That's what she is. Although I really do like the scene when they're in the bedroom together at night and they put the chair under the door so nobody can get in. She hugs him and cradles him. I think that's a very sweet moment. Although... she's doing bad things, and we know what he's already done and what he will do later in the story. But just in a human moment, no matter what kind of people they are, I really like that scene. It's one of the best scenes in the whole movie. And these two actors didn't even like each other. Really? Apparently, he was pissed off when she didn't know who he was because she was such a kid.
Yeah.
And not everyone knew what Psycho was. And it's not like he built a huge career out of that. He was typecast. He didn't want to play Norman Bates for the longest time. I don't think he talked about sequels much anyway. But by the time this came around, I guess he thought, well, I could use the money, and he came to grips with playing this character. He played him 3 times in 7 years after avoiding it for decades. But they didn't get along very well because I read that she didn't know who he was, and then he cold-shouldered her a lot, as did Richard Franklin, I guess, the director. So she hated making this movie. But the same year as it, she made The Big Chill, which I think she liked making with the young actors, youngish actors.
She's the young actor. They're all quite a bit older than her.
Okay, but they weren't 40. They were supposed to be 30-ish, I guess.
I wonder what happened to her, because she's a pretty good actress, and she's really pretty.
She was nominated for Agnes of God a couple years later, too, for an Oscar. So
oh, really?
What a building career she had there. And apparently she loved working on that movie.
Oh, I wonder what happened to her.
I've seen tweets. Her sister's a big tweeter. Jennifer tweets all the time. She's really embraced being in the Chucky movies. I was
going to say, yeah, also part of a huge horror franchise.
Yeah. There's that documentary on Canopy that just went up recently, Living with Chucky, and Jennifer Tilly's all over it. But I've seen Jennifer post pictures of the two of them. The sisters are close again, or always were close. I wouldn't recognize Meg, actually, if I didn't know it was Meg Tilly. Jennifer Tilly looks mostly the same. I'd say older, of course, but mostly the same.
It's anybody that you haven't seen for close to 40 years.
Well, let's see if Meg has kept acting, because I usually write down only a couple credits, unless we've covered a bunch of movies they're in. Let's see here. She's in Chucky, a couple episodes. Before that, the last thing she did was War Machine. I think that's the Brad Pitt movie. It's on Netflix. It was 2017, so it's been a long time since she was in anything other than a couple episodes of Chucky with her sister. Anyway, so the movie is bloodier than the original one is, and it's pretty graphic and brutally violent, but that makes more sense for the 80s. This is also following Halloween and Friday the 13th, and I guess they both had a sequel at that point. Yeah, they both had a sequel. And other movies of that type, made by a guy who'd made some pretty, I think, violent horror movies.
If you compare it to Psycho, well, of course it's going to fail. Anybody inviting themselves to be compared to Psycho is just setting themselves up to fail.
Unless you're Tarantino.
Okay, fine, unless you're Tarantino. But let's face it, Psycho is a perfect film. It's legendary.
Oh, it's not
You're
perfect,
never going to match it. Okay,
great.
Fine. It's a great, great film, a classic for a good reason. But if you compare this to other slasher films that were coming out at the same time, I think it really holds up. I think this is an excellent slasher film.
Yeah. The Halloween sequels got worse and worse as they went along. The Fridays did too, although Friday Part 4 was in 84, so it would have been the year after, and it's one of the better ones they ever made. But still, it's not better than this. So back to the Loomis's plot. Part of what they do is to have Mother's room look the way it did long ago. How they knew that for sure, I don't know. I guess you could have had crime scene photographs of it or something. But they want to drive Norman crazy, of course, so they make the room up to look like it did when his mother was living there. And then I guess it's when he's in the attic. So I guess it was Mary that did it, and then Mary stripped it down and made it look the way it did before again. That's quite a time-consuming and talented...
Noisy.
Right, to make that happen. But at least they acknowledge it. This movie does try to tie up as many loose ends as possible, because when the two of them are fighting in the hotel in town, which the clerk witnesses, he testifies that, yeah, I saw the two of them fighting, and he overheard what they were saying, too. When Mary's saying, I don't want to do this to this guy anymore. Yeah, I fixed up the room and I stripped it back down to be the way it was as part of this whole thing to drive him crazy, but I'm not doing it anymore, Mother. Tom Holland does a pretty good job with the screenplay of making that work. By the way, this is not really based on Psycho 2, the book that Robert Bloch, I think his name is Robert, B-L-O-C-H. Yeah, it is Robert Bloch. It's supposed to be based more on the first book, although they covered the first book in the first movie. But apparently the sequel book, they pretty much ignored it. So anyway, I thought the movie, screenplay-wise, certainly better than most slasher movies, but I think that held up pretty well too. Maybe it's a little bit too explainy, but then the end of the first Psycho is one of the most famous explaining moments of all time, which I don't really have a problem with the way a lot of people do. We covered the movie years ago. I forget if I said if I liked it or not then. I think in retrospect you need that. It would be a great ending in a lot of ways when Norman comes down the stairs and then Sam barely saves Lila from being killed by him in the cellar. In the struggle for the knife, Sam pulls the wig and the dress off, and you hear, even though Perkins' mouth isn't moving, you hear, I'm Norma Bates. And then the very end of the movie is him in the asylum. I'm not going to kill that fly. You see, she's good. She wouldn't even kill a fly. She wouldn't even harm a fly, in Mother's voice. You could do that, and it would be pretty good, but they tried to tie up a lot of loose ends. This movie does that more through the whole story, but they couldn't have done it in the first one, or else you give away your big twist. So anyway, do you think the screenplay is pretty good in that level of tying up loose ends and making, for the most part, sense?
I really think that they had some moments in mind that they wanted to get in here, and they worked backwards in a way that's clunky and hard to believe. Hard to believe that Mary would make the choices she would make. Hard to believe that Lila would have this total massive change of character over the years and go from a hero to a villain. And hard to believe that out of nowhere at the 11th hour, his birth mother shows up and...
Could have been lying.
She could have been lying. But why? Motivations are a huge problem in this film. I don't think the screenplay is perfect. I think...
Well, I don't think so either.
No.
Which is good.
It's good. I think it's really fun. I think it does a great job of keeping the film moving, of keeping us interested, of keeping us scared and guessing. There was a point, like, we're maybe 2/3 through the movie, and I was like, wow, I have no idea where this is going. And that's an exciting thing, especially for people like you and I who watch so many movies and analyze movies for fun and profit. Not that much profit. Fun and coffee. So I feel like you and I are very good at seeing where things are going and predicting where a movie's going. So whenever a movie can surprise me, I'm always delighted by that, even if it isn't 100% earned. I don't know, I give the script like a B. I wish it was more elegant, because there's so many things about it that work so well that I wish they kind of got out of their own way and stopped trying to impress people with the twists and turns and just made a good film that honestly followed the characters instead of these machinations so that they could get the moments they wanted.
Mrs. Spool says that she's his mother. She was in an asylum as well. So who's to say she's totally in her right mind in that last, or any of this movie, but in that last scene. But let's say the Loomises never did any of these things, and Norman tried to go back to his normal life, first in the diner, then running the motel. Would she have come in there anyway and tried to say, I'm your mother, and he wouldn't have been driven crazy, so he wouldn't have killed her? Would she just try to be part of his life? Would he believe her? Because he needs to believe that Norma Bates isn't his mother anymore and she's still alive. Because why else would I keep hearing these voices? I've been told by a doctor for decades that this isn't real, it never was, I did these things, I got to accept that, I got to live up to those kinds of things. It's one of those movies, too, you think, if they could have had a conversation, except Lila can't because she hates him and she wants to torture him, obviously. But if they'd sat down and he could say, I am so sorry I killed your sister, I guess that wouldn't have been enough. I'm pulling a modern thing if they just had a conversation. But that's, of course, what a horror movie's got to do, is not have these conversations because she wants her revenge. That's what it really comes down to, is that Lila is not literally insane, but finding out that Norman was going to get let out of jail makes you wonder how anyone would feel about Paul Bernardo here in Canada, or Charles Manson's dead now, I think. Well,
yeah, he's dead now.
Our trivia question for this month, I still host our trivia games. We're at 63 now. We've been doing it for a long time. And I had mostly Halloween, well, it was all Halloween type questions, horror questions, death, destruction, bad people type of things. One of the questions was, where's Mark David Chapman right now? He applied for parole last summer. He gets to again in a few months. If he's ever let out, what does Yoko Ono think about that? And Julian Lennon and Sean Lennon and anybody, the fans for that matter.
He would probably get murdered.
He might not get very far.
Yeah.
Revenge for John.
The boomers. All the boomers are
John shouldn't want. And death, if he's going to be hippie boy, then he shouldn't want that. All right, so let's talk about the cast. Anthony Perkins did other things, but he's obviously best known by far for these movies, especially the very first one. He directed Part 3. And I think it's probably one of those leverage things, but apparently they said, well, if you don't want to do this, Tony, then we'll get Chris Walken to do it instead. I guess to play Norman, not to play a character and call him something else. He would have been Norman. He would have been pretty good. Maybe a little too weird and quirky, though. We said Vince Vaughn, who's not a weird and quirky actor normally, but plays that way in the Psycho remake, and he was not good in that movie. He's the worst thing about it. I like some of the other actors. There's great actors in that. Better actors.
Julianne Moore is excellent in it, yeah.
She's Lila.
Yeah.
Anne Heche in her prime is Marion.
Yeah,
Philip
she's
Seymour
good.
Hoffman's in it. Philip Baker Hall's in it. Oh, maybe not Hoffman, but Baker Hall is. And I think also Macy, William H. Macy.
Yes.
Vera Miles, we've covered her in The Searchers, the original Psycho, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, where she's the scold for Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne. For Meg Tilly, this is the first movie we've ever covered. She was in The Big Chill that same year and was nominated for Agents, I've got here, but Agnes of God. They also thought about casting Jamie Lee Curtis as Mary, since she's Janet Leigh's daughter, which may have been too on the nose. I don't think she wanted to do that because she'd done so many horror films already. The first 5 films of JLC's career, I think I mentioned this when I did Halloween a while ago, were horror films. The first one, the second one, she was in, I think it's Road Games for Richard Franklin, Terror Train, and Prom Night. So she probably thought, I'm not doing another one. And my mom was in the original one. I can't do this.
But I did love that when she won her Oscar, she thanked the fans of the genre films, and she stood up for the genre films, for the horror films, obviously, when she says genre films. They are stigmatized, or everybody looks down on them, but there are some real works of art, and even if it's something that you don't think stands up to cinema, it makes a lot of people happy.
Well, some of the things in the best horror films are incredibly cinematic. Obviously in Psycho, but plenty of other things. Halloween's a great movie, especially from, I know you don't love it, but from the standpoint of how it was made, for a low budget like that, it's a beautiful movie.
Even something like Psycho 2, there are scenes that really scared me. I was tense, I was at the edge of my seat. This piece of art made you really feel something.
Yeah.
And that moment in the end, when he kills his birth mother, when he hits her in the head with the shovel, and it's cool, you know, the camera's up on the ceiling, it's a bird's eye view, looking down on the events. It caught me completely by surprise. In that moment, his performance is perfect, because he has this real dead-eyed, almost mechanical way of carrying it out. That's art. That really made me feel something.
Did you notice the shovel in the room?
Yeah, of course, because he brings it up from the basement, and you're like, why is he bringing a shovel upstairs? I thought the shovel was to dig her grave. He brings the shovel from the basement. Lila's already buried under the coal. I think he maybe shovels some of the coal into the furnace and then goes upstairs.
Lila's gone because they look for her.
Oh, okay, fine. But at any rate, I noticed that he brought the shovel upstairs, and that's in the kitchen. And I see him pick up the shovel when she's drinking her tea and telling her story.
Pardon? Wham!
Oh, God, brilliant. That moment alone makes it worth the price of admission. It caught me by surprise in the best way.
If I hadn't seen that scene so many times before, it would have caught me by surprise, too. Robert Loggia was in Big. I forgot about that one. I was looking at his credits. But yeah, he's the boss in Big for Tom Hanks.
Oh, yeah.
Independence Day. All right! And Lost Highway. We covered that last year. He was also in Scarface, the De Palma one, the same year as this. So it was a pretty big year for Loggia. There you go. I said it a few times like Tarantino does. I've never heard anybody else ever say that except for Quentin Tarantino.
Wait, how do you think it's pronounced then?
I've always heard Loggia.
Loggia.
Dennis Franz had a cameo in The Player and did a lot of flicks with De Palma in this era. He wasn't in Scarface, but he was in Blowout, which I loved, and many others, I think, before and maybe a few after that. Hugh Gillen, who is the Sheriff Hunt. Yeah, Sheriff Hunt. He was in Psycho 3, obviously playing the same role, and also Back to the Future Part 3. Claudia Breyer, we've said her name so much today. Well, not her name, but the character she plays, Mrs. Spool. This was her final film. She was uncredited in Giant, and she and Vera Miles were in The Wrong Man for Hitchcock back in the 50s. Richard Franklin directed, I already said, Patrick, Road Games, Cloak and Dagger. Holland wrote that, and also Fright Night and Child's Play in the 80s. Pretty great decade for Tom Holland doing horror films. At a pretty short period of time, too. 83, 85, I think, and 88. So about 5 years apart for those three. He said in the past decade that he regrets what he did to Norman and Lila, because this, of course, it wasn't really original. It was based somewhat on the books, but I don't know what he means exactly, because Norman is, I think, pretty consistent with what he would have had to be from the first story. Lila is a greatly changed character.
I feel like it's a failure what the film does to her character. They possibly would have been better off introducing a brand new character, somebody else who could have been related to one of the victims somehow.
She may not be big enough. May not have gone big enough. If she's going to be insane.
I understand. If you can cast Vera Miles in your sequel, you're going to write Vera Miles apart in your sequel, and you're going to make it meaty enough that she's going to want to do it. So I can see all the motivations behind writing the character like this, but it just doesn't work. You don't go from being that much of a hero in the first film to becoming an irrational villain. And when I say
I don't
irrational,
agree. I think you can definitely do that.
all of her motivations in the first film are about love. She loves her sister. She's looking for her sister. And then ultimately she wants justice for her sister. And then in the second film, she still wants justice for her sister. But this woman who's so motivated by love for somebody is willing to put her daughter in harm's way in
that'll
this.
give you.
Her daughter's pushing back and she's forcing her to do this. I just don't buy it. Those are the same people.
She's a stage mom. You're going to do this. Because Mary is acting.
She's asking her to take absolutely insane risks.
To do any of this, let alone when it starts to get more serious.
Like any mother doing this, that's a villain. And of course she gets her just desserts. She gets murdered, as does Mary, though. Mary, who doesn't deserve to die at all.
Yeah, misunderstanding is why she was killed, because the cops are doing what they should.
And then she gets blamed for all the murders. Oh, well, we have our murderer here. Look at this.
Well, they do. I think the official story is that Lila and Mary both killed people. The producer was Hilton Green, who was an assistant director on the first Psycho, and also produced Psycho 3 and 4. The movie's 185-1. We saw it on the DVD from the Toronto Public Library, and unlike The Wicker Man, it didn't cause any problems. It didn't cut out during any of the really great scenes like Britt Eklund dancing naked. There wasn't anything like that in this movie anyway. But no, the DVD was nice and clean. Dean Cundey shot it. I talked about him on Halloween a few weeks ago. He shot that too. Also did The Thing, Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, Apollo 13, and many others. He's working, maybe not the only, but one of the cinematographers at least, on The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett now. He's in his 70s. He's had this incredible 50-plus year career, and he's still working on big projects like that. The editor, Andrew London, also cut Rambo 3, which would have been a couple years after this, and Cloak and Dagger for Franklin. I mentioned Jerry Goldsmith was the composer. He liked the score. I did too. My 2 podcasts, I've now covered 14 of his movies in total. 3 on scoring at the movies with Chris, so Hoosiers, Mr. Baseball, and Rudy. But for you and I, it's Planet of the Apes, Patton, Chinatown, The Omen, Alien, Poltergeist. Already I could stop you saying, that's incredible. Gremlins, Total Recall, Basic Instinct, LA Confidential, and Air Force One.
Wow.
Some of those sound similar enough, but think about Planet of the Apes, Chinatown, Alien, Total Recall, Air Force One. Narrow it down to those ones. Very diverse types of scores, and then didn't rely on just going with what Bernard Herrmann did and adapt it for this. He wanted to do his own thing, and he did.
Kept up with the times. Because talk about the score for Total Recall, it sounds like a score from the 90s, not like a score from the 60s, right?
So anyway, the look, I think it's pretty good for a movie that wasn't a huge budget.
I think it looks great,
The cutting,
actually.
it's not long.
You're making the jump from black and white to color, so you have to make all brand new choices. They had a lot of stuff that was still in storage, but they had to recreate the sets, and they had to decide what color all of these things were going to be and create the look from scratch. But I think it's a great looking movie.
And pretty well cut.
There's so many problems that are at the script level. Not that it ruins the film, but from scene to scene, the way that the tension builds is incredibly effective. The masterwork of a thriller. Really well cut, well shot.
So you went into this not knowing what was going to happen, so I can ask you this question. I was about to say, I wonder what people thought, but I can ask you this question. Here's a sequel about the most one of the most notorious serial killers, or killers, period, in the history of film. He's got to kill if you're going to make another movie all over again. But then until the point where he kills his mother at the end, the real mother, whatever, Mrs. Spool, he didn't kill anybody. So do you remember thinking, wait a minute, why is Norman not actually killing people in this movie?
I don't think he had to kill. I think the movie introduces him as a sympathetic character, and he truly could go either way, which is a really brilliant way to build tension right from the jump.
Pretty ballsy, though, to make a movie where he doesn't kill anybody.
Totally, but it works.
Although he does in the end. But
he does in the end, but the audience is rooting for him to make it.
Yeah.
Rooting for him to have a normal life. Because he was a victim of his mother, a victim of his mental illness. You could say it's not all his fault, even though he absolutely is a killer. Although I was really hoping, when it was looking like it was wrapping up, that we were going to learn that he was the killer all along, and that everybody having faith in him was incorrect, that Mary was wrong to have faith in him, that Dr. Raymond was wrong to believe that he would have gotten better. I was really hoping that's where it was going. I think that would have been a more elegant way to end the movie. Imagine that scene where he hits his mother in the head with a shovel. Imagine that scene if it was Lila. If they had written it so that Lila, by the end, with Mary urging her, comes around and says, oh my gosh, you have been reformed. You didn't kill my sister out of malice and evil, but out of a sickness that you've been cured of. Imagine she's sitting at his table contemplating that he could have become a better man and that he deserves to have a second chance. And then in that moment, out of nowhere, he succumbs to the crazy and he hits her in the head with the shovel. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Don't you think that would have been maybe a better, more elegant ending than what we got? Just as shocking.
It might be a good point.
And then we discover that he was the one doing the murders all along, and you could write it somewhere that somebody else gets blamed for the murder somehow. But
they'd probably be thinking that they would be reprising the first movie all over again if that was the case, though.
So what if you are? It's not like people go see Friday the 13th movies and are disappointed when they discover Jason was the killer all along.
But other than the first movie, there's no mystery as to who's killing anybody in that.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a mystery. It's absolutely a mystery. Yeah, that's the driving force of the plot. This is just me being nitpicky. You would have to really tear apart the script and build it from scratch if you wanted to make a big change like that.
Yeah, you would.
But that is where I found myself hoping it was going at the end, and I was wrong.
We're remaking the movie right here in this room. What happens next? Well, yeah, there are more entries in the series, we know that, and also Bates Motel on TV. But let's forget about that for a minute. So I say what happens next is that Norman reopens the motel without incident. Clearly, he's fine now. Publicly, he is. The doctor can't say anything about it, unless the doctor wrote something down somewhere.
Dead.
That's what I'm saying. He's dead. He can't say anything about it. So Norman can just pretend he's a normal person.
Yeah.
To everyone else who's going to be around. Although almost everybody in this story does die. The ones we care about. Let's see. Miles is dead. Tilly's dead. Oh, Tilly, our dog. Logia is dead. Franz is dead. Claudia Breyer is dead. Man, a lot of people get murdered in this movie.
He's just going to go to the diner and kill everyone left there after this. That's what happens next.
You were
a nice guy who gave him a job when he didn't have to.
You're an okay boss, but not a great boss. Okay, then last thoughts on Psycho 2.
You know, it's almost as if the legacy of Psycho got in the way of a great thriller here, but it left us with a very good thriller, the likes of which we don't come by very often these days, so very worthwhile.
I'm not with Tarantino in saying it's better than the original, because it's not, but it's a very worthy, I think, and a very logical, I also think, follow-up to one of the all-time classics. Lila wants revenge, drives her insane, she ruins everything. Her husband was already dead, now she is, so is her daughter. I think Perkins is pretty good in this, better than you thought he was. Especially since he doesn't get to play those shades of gray that he got to play in the other movie. He is the number, I think, 3 villain on the AF, maybe 2. In the top 3, at least, on the AFI's Heroes and Villains list. Lecter and Vader, they're the 2 that are in that top 3. The problem with that is you give away, if people haven't seen Psycho and saw that list would think, but why? Except, again, he is covering up. At the very least, he's hiding his mother's murders before you find out it's actually him doing it. But I think it's interesting he has to play this character where that mystery's gone, and it's a different mystery in this one. Yeah, maybe he's an aged actor and isn't as naturalistic as Meg Tilly's generation was and she herself was, but I think he's good in the movie. And he gets to play all kinds of fresh takes on this character. And as I recall, he's pretty good in Psycho 3, where he directs himself. There's a scene I remember Roger Ebert wrote that Hitchcock would have been proud of, with some ice cubes. So that's it for Psycho 2, and that's it for our 8th annual Scary Movie Month. The first episode you can download in the 11th month of the year will be the Rita Hayworth Glenn Ford film noir Gilda, which I'll be talking about on my own, although you watched it with me and you liked it, right?
Yeah.
Good movie. Look for that on Friday the 3rd. As for the next time Bev is across from me, that will be in 7 Sundowns, when she and I cover our second Todd Solondz movie.
Is it Salons? I've been always saying Salons.
I think it's Solondz.
Oh, dear.
That's what we said in Welcome to the Dollhouse, which was our previous Todd Solondz movie nearly 2 years ago. Now we'll be checking out an ensemble cast in the dramedy about very uncomfortable issues, Happiness, which we watched last night. So I didn't know what the question was going to be until we even watched it. I thought, what's my trivia question going to be? Or an opinion question? I thought about it for a while this afternoon. I finally came up with the coming attractions opinion question for Happiness. Only one of the characters commits suicide in Happiness, even though almost nobody has a happy ending at the end of the story. So who will be next?
Who will be next?
Because somebody is going to kill himself.
Okay, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about happiness. Let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. Is there a movie you'd like to hear us cover? Well, you can make a recommendation by leaving us a review and a rating, or you can just leave us a review and a rating because you like us and you want to help us reach more listeners. It's a great way to support the podcast.
Quick thing, by the way. Lucian Lawrence, I think is his name, has commented a few times to us, and I never responded. I should have. I owe some emails. We owe emails to other people, too. I think it's him that said more than once, you got to watch Four Lions. You got to see Four Lions.
Yes, we finally watched Four Lions, Lucian.
And we thought it was good.
Really surprised me. Talk about films where you don't know where it's going.
Ending.
And legitimately funny and charming in a way that I never thought a film with that subject matter could have charmed me.
Pretty poignant at the end.
Yes. Great recommendation. So we are both on Twitter or
Perks.
X. Twitter X. I'm at Bev Ellis.
Twixer.
And Ryan is at MovieFiend51. You can also reach us by email, haveyouverinpodcast@gmail.com. And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Let's go have a toasted cheese sandwich. Then I'll carry you up to the bedroom. And don't worry, I was kidding about having a favorite shovel. Any shovel will do.
And cut.
And shovel.